All right, we're going to talk about death again, crazy cremation stories. We're going to talk about the case of a 38-year old father that still haunts Nicole to this day. Nicole, say hi.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me.
And besides that, now she has to have fun talking about death, how she does that. The worst thing real estate investors can do with their estate planning, the case that saved one man $4 million in estate planning. What's worse to decide than what to do when you die? And of course, you'll never guess where some of these people want their ashes spread. All this on True Law Stories. But don't forget, this is brought to you by videocasestory.com. One of the best ways to promote your business, to grow your business, is through customer stories. It'll help you stand out. Make sure to check out the book, Video Testimonials That Land the Big Fish, #1 on Amazon. You just go search for it or click the link in the show notes. It has step-by-step guide for you. All right, let's get started. Nicole is an estate planning and probate attorney in Miami. Nicole, before we start with your stories, which we've been having a lot of fun with before, tell me a little bit about why you got into estate planning and how you did.
Yeah, so I actually went to law school thinking I was going to be a prosecutor. And while I was in law school, realized that's not what I wanted at all. My favorite class in school was trust and estates, wills, trust and estates. And as it turns out, my first job was in litigation. I knew I didn't want to do that long term. So after a couple of years, I decided, let me go back to what I really enjoyed. And it's been wonderful. The probate side really came kind of like a natural overlap to the estate planning, but I also knew that that's something I would do eventually. I lost my own mom before I was an attorney, and it was a nightmare. And I thought people needed to know what it would be like if there was some planning in place. And so, right after my mom passed away, I forced my dad to get some planning, and he didn't want to do it. And then 2 years later, he passed away. And I always say the experience of losing both of them is awful. But the difference between having dealt with my dad and having planning and have everything laid out was very different from the experience I had with my mom. So it just became my goal and my mission to help people and avoid as much of this kind of a nightmare that I experienced as possible.
It's tough. It's crazy, and it's because yeah, I talk about this because we've talked with some, many estate planning attorneys, and but you have first-hand experience with your father. Why did he not want to do it?
I think it was just still too raw, having lost my mom. He didn't want to face his own mortality. It's never easy. The experience, what I try to pass on to my clients is even though it's really hard to consider your own death and your preferences and who's going to handle your affairs and what you want to happen in end stage conditions, for example, it's always better to be able to do that now where we can maybe even joke about it versus it being too late. And then all of those decisions fall on your family, whether it's your children, your partner. And if they don't know what your preferences are, it's haunting to make those decisions and have to live with them, not knowing if it's what they would have wanted. So I dealt with that. I dealt with that firsthand. And so I tell people all the time it is really hard, especially my clients that have young children. It's the worst case scenarios thinking about you passing before your children can care for themselves. But if you don't, the chances are that someone you don't even know, a judge, is going to make the decision for you. So it's really what I try to emphasize. And I mean, I really feel for my clients because I've dealt with it at a pretty young age. And I know that I can help people navigate this in a better way than others that might not have had that personal experience.
And when you've had this happen, we talked about before, you've had a few clients where this has happened, where they didn't even complete the process for some reason or another, and it happened. But before we get into that, from your point of view, what did it do to you when you were younger that all this was happening?
Oh gosh, it's haunting. You have to figure out or live with the decisions you've made. Hope you made the best decisions or that it's what your parents or whoever would have wanted. And it takes time to come to peace with that. And so it's always oh, what if we would have had this conversation or planned or thought things out? And I say, I really try not to approach this with that fear mongering mentality of you better do this before you die, before something awful happens. But the truth of the matter is, we don't know when our time is up. And so it's never too late. until you're already dead or incapacitated. So I don't know, I really strive once people get in the door and make the decision to do the planning, to do it as fast as possible so that we don't have a situation where someone came in and they weren't able to complete it.
And you were talking about that's happened several times to you, hasn't it?
Oh God, yeah. Recently, I would say earlier this year, at the end of last year, actually, we had a client come in, a young, just before he turned 40, to do some planning. He was a divorced man with a minor child, wanted to make sure that his estate was taken care of and that his son would inherit everything in the way that he wanted. And so we set up planning for him. He had a work trip and rescheduled his signing date for his documents. And as it turned out, um, we rescheduled it. And before he actually came in to sign the documents, he passed away unexpectedly. And that, I mean, that's something that it still keeps me up at night. What could we have done differently had we known here's a perfectly healthy guy, has no health issues, has no reason to believe that an additional week or two down the line is going to be an issue. But it just reinforces that time is really of the essence, even if someone seems healthy and well. So that's something that was to come to terms with, and it's become part of our training here at the firm. Really, is when someone signs, and we are like rocket speed because I'm terrified of something like this happening again.
Oh, yeah. And but on the flip side, when it works well, you've I'm sure you hear from do you hear from clients afterwards how happy they are that their parents or loved ones did all this?
Yes, and there's a ton of Google reviews to prove it. One of the ways I like to describe what we do with the planning side is I had a couple come in who had minor children, and the husband travels a ton for work. And on the day that he signed his documents, he said to me, "You have given me sleepful nights. That's what this is. Because I can travel and know that if anything happens to me, my family's taken care of." And I had never thought of it that way. There's a million reasons why people should do planning, but I'd never thought that giving them a good night's rest was one of them. So I tell clients that this is going to help you rest easy. It's going to sleep. You're going to sleep easy on this after you've done it and have really outlined everything that you're wishing and who should get what and when. Really, so it's a huge peace of mind.
And yeah, and it's interesting. Like, I you listen to other podcasts about it, and everyone's happy at the end of it. But they still delay doing it, and it's really
Oh,
not as difficult as people think, is it?
yeah, it's really not, but it is such a proactive area of law. My experience has been unless someone has gone through that pain with a very close friend or family member who had to go through a probate or something difficult, those folks are usually far more motivated to do their plan because they've seen firsthand the nightmare, the expense, the drag out of the process. But for the folks who have never experienced that first, secondhand, it's just counterintuitive to plan for when you pass away because people don't want to think about it. They don't want to have to deal with it. And I agree, nobody really does. So I really just try to make it as easy and fun as possible. If you can even insert that word into this process. But I do like to think that we have fun in the process. And I tell clients all the time that it's exponentially better to be able to do it now, have a laugh about a silly joke, and consider some circumstances versus your family figuring out on their own, or worse, a judge having to decide for you how your stuff is going to be split, when it goes, or who it goes to, and then the process of the probate that they're not in control of.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's a lot easier than everything having to happen all at once, and it very rarely happens all at once when it's convenient, does it?
Right. Exactly.
I've got some spare time. I'm glad that this all happened now.
Yeah.
But you've also saved people a lot of money, right? Doing this, it saves them a lot. It saves their heirs and transforms their legacy, doesn't it?
For sure. One of my favorite stories is a client who came in who was a business, or not a business, a real estate investor. And he had, I don't know, something like 14, 15 properties in his own name. And for folks that do this, know that that's just like a big no no and like a huge sign on their forehead: sue me, I've got lots of money. And so he came in, He was a foreign national, has been in the United States for a long time, started accumulating properties and pretty high end ones, and just would buy them in his own name and rent them out. And he came into my office. He wouldn't give anything for this guy, like blue jeans and flip flops. And he's like, got a couple properties. And I don't know, someone told me recently it's not a good idea to have them in my name. And so I went through the whole process and drew out on a whiteboard what that would look like. And I said, just to make this scenario more realistic for you, how many properties are we talking about? I'm going to draw the houses little. And he goes, and I can't remember, it was like 15 or something like. And I just looked at him. I'm like, you have 15 properties in your name. And he's like, yeah, I've been buying one every couple of years. And 1 year there was a really good investment opportunity. So I brought a couple of, and I'm just like, okay, we need to start over. I need to stress to you how important it is for you to do planning and not have these properties in your name. And so after we went through this pretty complex structure and helping him understand the benefits of all the things that we were talking about, he was just like, oh, this is great. You came highly recommended. Let's do it. I was able to show him. And typically this is what I do is we will show people what it costs today with no planning to probate your estate versus, and if there's any tax implications, and then what it'll cost if you have planning. And so we did that. And based on the structure that we created for him, we saved him close to $4 million. And he was just like, there's no way. I'm like, oh, way. That's what we could do through planning. It's not always that much. It depends on every situation. But with what we were able to put together for him, he was thrilled. I was thrilled he found us in time. And he's one of my favorite stories because he was so open and he came at the right time because he was still well and alive and open to doing that. So it worked out.
Yeah, and you make a good point because also even if someone does live longer, a lot of times they can't make those decisions well down the road, can they?
And that's part of the planning is not just planning for worst case scenario, which is in the event of death, which we're all going to die one day. That's a guaranteed. It's also planning for incapacity if you can't care for yourself. And sometimes those are even more difficult decisions to make than how is this stuff going to get transferred into your heirs, your beneficiaries' name. I always say that the things will get sorted out, even if you don't get all of it, even if there's a hefty price tag associated with probate or dealing with those assets, the things will be fixed. What can't be fixed or we can't salvage is the experience that people, if you have minor children, what happens to them and there's no nomination of guardians for the kids, or if you're incapacitated and your family, whoever your loved ones are, and they don't know your preference about the living will, whether you want to be maintained artificially or alive or not, if you want to be cremated or buried, those are all super important decisions that we talk about. They're tough, but I think we do it gracefully with a little bit of sense of humor.
It's the best way to do it, right? You got to laugh a little bit about it.
I hope so, but not everyone has that approach.
Yeah, I think you should. It's in the end, it's all funny, right? What comedy is just tragedy far enough removed.
I like that.
It's, and speaking of comedy, people have some pretty crazy requests about what to do with them after they die, don't they?
Oh my gosh, we could write a coffee table book about it. And so what I find really interesting is that for the number of folks who are hesitant to continue their plan, right? They'll reach out, do that initial consult and say, yes, I want to do that. And then some people take 2 years to actually go through the process and finish their planning. Some far less than that. But for all the folks that do it that are hesitant and take a long time, they sure have thought out about what they want to happen to them when they're no longer here. I'd say earlier in my career, I hadn't seen so many different scenarios and I wasn't as professionally prepared for the things I was going to hear. And I had a couple relatively young couples sitting in front of me, and we came to the part of their planning. We were structuring everything, and we always talk about almost the last topic is preference to be cremated and buried. And they were both very adamant about being cremated. And so the follow up question is always, what would you like? Do you have any specific wishes for your ashes? And this couple was the husband who said to me, oh, yes, we would like our ashes to be put in our cat's cat litter. And I, of course, surely thought they are so funny and just started laughing hysterically. And I abruptly stopped because they were both deer in headlights staring at me as serious as could be. And I realized they were not joking. I was half looking around. This is a joke. This can't be. And so they proceeded to tell me that they wanted their cat to feel connected to their souls.
Oh my gosh.
And so with that, I no longer laugh. I have other stories. People have some very specific wishes of what they want to happen to them when they're no longer here. I've heard people wanting to be transformed into a tree, which I think is beautiful. People who want to be buried in a pink casket with a 3-piece Scottish band playing, and it has to be authentic with a kilt and nothing underneath. These are all very specific specifications. I no longer laugh. I just take the notes.
Does anyone try and pull your leg and, oh, I want to do that? And you're like, okay. And they're like, I'm just kidding. So I would do that.
No, I would love that. I'd be able to have a real laugh. But no, after the cat litter situation, I just poker face through it. I don't even suggest that it could be potentially a joke. After that one, I really learned my lesson. But no, every once in a while, someone will say something silly, but nothing that's that wild. The ones that are wild are serious. Like they've thought about this. That's their wish.
I had some pretty like my mind just went to the worst places possible. I'm not going to talk about those. Maybe another episode. I was trying to think of all the ideas. I'm like, how can I mess with Nicole on this one?
I don't know. You can try. I'll do what I do with my clients, is just poker face it.
I'm like, okay,
And
sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, that is crazy stuff. But it's the big event for everyone, and it's amazing that some people just don't want to plan for it, and some people have these crazy plans, and then you've got the people in the middle that do the right thing. So speaking of doing the right thing, we'll send people if they're in the area in South Florida and looking for estate planning, go to martinslegal.com. You also have an Instagram page it's the martinslawfirm.com, or Instagram at Martins Law Firm.
That's it. Yep.
All right. And we'll put a link to all of that in the show notes. We definitely want to have you come back sometime and tell some more of these crazy stories and the fun stories, and maybe some sad stories as well. You like sad things as well.
And it's been a lot of fun. You've made it easy.
Yeah, Nicole, thank you. I made it easy after we got all the technical glitches done. We still got it done. Well, thank you all for taking Nicole and I on your journey. Make sure to check out martinslegal.com. You all, I'm sorry to tell you, everyone listening to this is going to die. And so if you're in South Florida and you think you're going to eventually die, you probably should talk to Nicole. But make sure to follow her on Instagram. And this has been Iron Garlic and True Law Stories.